Hello, this is Dr. Kathy Marshack, and for another session of Dr. Kathy's Office Hours. This is an opportunity for members to send in a question that they would like answered, a topic that maybe isn't covered on one of our video conferences or teleconferences, or even in discussions in my blogs or the forums or books. Or maybe they want us to go into more depth. You know, they want to have a discussion here that talks about it a little more deeply. So we've got 5 topics tonight, so I'm going to try to go through all of them. The first one is, why do our Aspies, seem to refuse a diagnosis? The second topic is, even though they may promise that they're going to change or even believe they're changing, they don't seem to change. The third topic is, how do you bring up this topic with other people about what you're living with, the Asperger syndrome, the challenges? How do you talk about it to other people? Or should you even talk about it? The fourth topic is kind of this conflict that we have with our Asperger loved ones regarding death and dying and how they grieve. So it's a pretty deep subject. An important subject, and many of us have had experiences with not getting very far when we talk to our Aspies about this. And then the fifth subject we've brought up many times, but I think it's a very good question. It's, how do our illnesses reflect the life we're living, thus us non-spectrum people? How do our illness reflect this stress that we're under? Are we adapting to our Asperger loved ones, or are we reacting? So we'll talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with why our Asperger loved ones seem to refuse the diagnosis or even to acknowledge it. The reason is pretty simple, and they will often say, why do I need that information? And they fail to get that we need the information, that the solution to these problems that we have with our loved ones are getting it properly diagnosed, then getting treatment, narrowing down the range of options to high-functioning autism treatments, and that it would help us if they got diagnosed. It's just beyond their comprehension that that's relevant, and yet primarily high-functioning autism is a disorder of relationships. It's a disorder of social skills and interacting with others, having healthy relationships. So obviously, we need the diagnosis to improve the relationship between us. The other reason they refuse the diagnosis is because they think of psychology and psychotherapy as just talking. And what we know about our Aspies in talking is that they believe conversations are sort of, or small talk, for example, isn't really relevant. So they have a hard time understanding how they might engage with a psychologist, learn something that could improve the quality of their relationships. I can come back to that one a little bit later if we need to, but let's go ahead and move along so we get to everything. The second question is why is it that even with the diagnosis or going into therapy, our Asperger loved ones will promise to change, that they want to do better, and yet they don't? And I have to tell you, my Asperger clients will tell me the same thing about their non-spectrum spouse. They frequently tell me that they're doing all the work and their non-spectrum spouse isn't changing. So I think that this is a little more complicated. It's about looking at what we mean by change, all right? The spectrum person is looking at the topic of change, the activities of change, and they may actually be trying harder, but not really improving empathy or their ability to connect. Whereas what we're doing is looking at how do we connect better to someone who doesn't have empathy. So we're seeing a lot of changes in ourselves as we, try a new approach, as we give them room to not understand, as we accept that they're not going to totally understand how we feel. They don't think that's change. Change would look like something that you could add up. So instead of saying, why aren't they changing? Or why aren't they changing like me? I think the better question might be something like, how can we do this better? How can we talk to each other with more kindness, more compassion? How can we give each other room to just be who you are, and yet try a few approaches that may help the other person feel better? It's tough. It's a tough sell because Aspies do not see the value in helping you. They just would like you to feel better, but they don't understand that if they're helping, you'll feel better. So this is one that you're going to have to talk about a lot, and I would stop adding up that, whether they're changing or not, or whether they've promised to change and it's not happening. So the third question is, how do you talk with others? How do you bring up the subject that you're living with someone on the spectrum? Are you worried about upsetting them, embarrassing them, causing problems for them at work or in the community? And I think all of those questions are very valid. If your spouse is open about it, I have people with high-functioning autism that tell other people it's true. They often will praise their spouse for pushing and making them get into treatment. They talk about how if it weren't for my wife, I wouldn't know about this. I wouldn't be able to help my children. And I really would like to help other people who are on the spectrum. So I actually have spectrum people who value, talking about it. Another reason to talk about it, of course, is a more practical one in terms of perhaps getting a work plan at their workplace that allows them to have room for their sensitivities. Maybe they have a quiet place to work. Perhaps they need to have the overhead lights switched to LED from fluorescence. Many people on the spectrum have a hard time listening to what's going on in a meeting because there's several people there. So a work plan, not a corrective work plan, but a workplace accommodation for disability would be something like other people can take notes, and the person with Asperger's can get those notes after the meeting to review so that they know kind of what went on. So there's a value to talking about it and to getting some help, like I said, with workplace accommodations, because a diagnosis of autism does qualify the person for disability protection. That I think that's a big deal. But another reason to talk about it is for us. We need to talk to other people who get the stresses and strains of this lifestyle and won't dismiss it. So I certainly have been dismissed a lot just from trying to talk about my personal life, but even when I write about things, I get a lot of comments that I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm being unkind to bring up the subject. It's as if the neurotypical spouse is supposed to suffer in silence and just be patient with the disability and not ask for herself or himself. So the reason to talk about it with a select group of people that will support you is that you need support. This is a very confusing lifestyle, and I just tell all of my Asperger clients that their spouse needs to talk about it and to get over feeling bad about it. It doesn't mean it's that easy to do, but if the couple talks about how this is part of the healing process and the psychologist helps them with that, I honestly think it will go just 100% better. The way we talk about it, that's tricky too. Trying to educate everybody, or even your close friends and family, trying to go into depth about this. Life is not easy, but if they're open, have them read books, have them read my books, have them go to my website and find other resources that they can read and understand. And I can't imagine they won't do this for you if they're close enough. But if they're not terribly interested, I wouldn't press it, because there may be some other reasons they don't want to hear this. And that's something I can talk about a little bit. Actually, maybe I should mention it here. When people don't want to hear what you have to say, it could be because it's triggering one of their own issues. I've seen that happen many, many times, where somebody resisted hearing about the Asperger's in my life, and then 2 years later let me know that they finally realized that their 19-year-old college student child is on the spectrum. Or perhaps they figured out that their parent was on the spectrum. So hearing it from me or about me, it was too soon, too painful. Don't give up. Don't give up, and know what you know, and talk about what you know, and don't let anybody stop you from knowing it. This next topic is actually really amazing. It's about grief. Boy, I can come at this from lots of different angles. Everyone in the group has heard stories about how our Asperger loved ones seem to be oblivious about the suffering going on in death and dying. I've heard some terrible stories about how those on the spectrum just, walked out of the room with somebody who was really at death's door, and they just didn't say goodbye, didn't give them a hug, didn't think about it. One of the stories that I've told is when my ex-husband's grandmother called. She called from the hospital, and she was not doing well. She had congestive heart failure, and this was in the days before cell phones. So when she called, she wanted to speak to her grandson, and he wasn't home. And I talked with her for a while. She and I chatted, but I'm not as important as her grandson. And I said, as soon as I can reach him, I will have him call you and come up to the hospital. So when he did get home, I told him what was going on, that his grandmother was really doing poorly, and congestive heart failure is, if you have one episode and survive, that's pretty amazing. If you have two and survive, that's a miracle. So this was, I think, her second time in the hospital with this problem. And so I urged him to go to the hospital right away, to call her first and tell her he loved her, and then head on up to the hospital. So he didn't. He didn't think it was necessary. He had other things to do, and she passed away that night, and he never got a chance to talk to her, and she didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her grandson. Does that mean that he didn't care? Perhaps. I think it's more like they don't know how this works. They don't have the ability to put themselves in the other person's shoes, even the dying person's shoes. But they certainly don't know how to put themselves in the shoes of what grieving is about. So they just don't relate to things they haven't been through before. And then even when they have been through it a time or two, they still, they still seem to not quite get it. And so when we talk about death and grieving, it can be a complicated process cognitively, and that story I told you was a cognitive problem. My ex-husband was not able to add up the numbers and understand the importance of getting to the hospital to see his grandmother one last time. But they also may have a problem just expressing their feelings. The people on the spectrum often have a disconnect between their feelings and the description of their feelings, and then telling you what they're feeling, and let alone trying to figure out how to tell you so that you understand what's going on. So instead of talking to me, I offered lots of options for him to share his worry or his grief. He just went and got on his computer and started doing some work. So does that mean he doesn't care? I don't think so. I think it's that I have no idea how to talk about it. I don't know what these feelings are inside. And in fact, a couple years later, we were talking about, or I wasn't talking about it. All of a sudden, he said to me, "Do you ever think about death?" And I said, "Well, sure, I do. I mean, I think about my death. I think about the deaths of people that I've loved and I've lost. I sort of ponder the philosophical questions about, what's after death, or what I should do with my life before I die. Sure, I think about it." And I thought maybe we were going to have a deep conversation. His brother had just passed away. His second grandmother had just passed away. And I thought, oh, this is on his mind. And so I waited. I thought, oh good, we're going to have a discussion. And he kind of looked at me, turned around and walked away. And I said, well, what about you? What about you? And he said, yeah, I don't think about death. And then he left the room. So does he not think about it? Maybe. Maybe that's true, because he hasn't died and he doesn't know really how to relate to it. Or is it that it's just a jumble of stuff inside of him that is so complex, and because he doesn't have empathy, he doesn't know how to talk to me about it? Grieving. I think that related to death and dying, I think that all human beings grieve. I think that our Asperger loved ones definitely grieve. But again, for us, grieving is a process that we share, that we exchange with others. We go to the funeral and we talk to people. We get up and we say a cute story about the person that has passed away. Or if we're quiet, that's okay, but we're still looking around, or we reach out and tap someone on the shoulder, or we engage. Grieving is a process of engaging with others about the loss in our community or in our family. But if, for the person on the spectrum, if all emotions are really just something that they hold, that they have, as opposed to that they share with others, then grief would be one of those things they hold also, that they don't share. And that sort of leaves us feeling empty at a really important moment, like the death of a loved one. So there's more to think about and talk about on that topic, and hopefully you can do that in the forums. Lastly, the last topic is a really important one. This member talked about having a variety of illnesses. She does have some immune deficiency illnesses as a result of the stress, and that's pretty common for our group to be to get a variety of illnesses like arthritis and migraine headaches and fibromyalgia, skin disorders, just lots of things like that, because the body is constantly in turmoil in these, or not constantly, but frequently and intermittently in turmoil in these relationships with loved ones on the spectrum. So what happens is that our body's working too hard. It's getting too much energy pouring into solving these, these problems, and they just don't get solved, and we get sicker and sicker. But what was interesting is that this member also talked about having OCD or hoarding. These a problem that you typically would associate with somebody who's on the spectrum, as opposed to the spouse. But what I think is important is that as we don't take care of ourselves, those weaknesses in us will grow. So if you've got an anxiety issue already, it can grow into something intense, like hoarding, or just expanding your distress to fill up the space. And so, or you can assume some of the same anxiety symptoms as your spouse. After all, we have empathy, so we're sort of connecting and understanding and absorbing some of that distress that they have and expressing it through our own body and our own actions. So this is all the more reason to get therapy, to participate in this group and talk to other people about what's going on, because you don't want to absorb somebody else's stress. You've got enough of your own. We need ways to release it. So you need to go to psychotherapy. You need to go to get a massage. You need to soak in the hot tub. You need to hang out with friends and laugh. We have to take extra special care of ourselves so we don't slip over into those anxiety disorders. And I think that they can grow exponentially when we don't realize what's happening later. When we have an unusual problem like hoarding, we think something's terribly wrong with us, when it really just might be over-identification with your Asperger loved one, and or the anxiety stream that's flowing through you just has to find a way to express itself, whether it be through a rash, a headache. In my case, I was always falling downstairs. I broke my wrist, I broke my ankle 3 times, I broke my foot, I broke my leg, I broke toes, I've sprained fingers, I've sprained my ankle, and I know it's just the darndest thing. But what was going on for me is excessive stress. I was moving too fast, I wasn't paying attention, and I would fall, or I would back into something and break something. So, and as a matter of fact, when I started taking better care of myself, you need to know that I stopped breaking bones entirely. I haven't had a broken bone in years. But when I was still under the stress of coping with Asperger's in my home and nobody helping and nobody listening to me, I was falling downstairs, falling into things, slipping on the bathroom tile. It just was apparently my way of showing the distress. So in answer to this last topic about what are the illnesses associated with living with someone on the spectrum, I think the illness depends on your particular style, where it's going to show. But what we know about stress is that it needs to be released in healthy ways every day through prayer, meditation, yoga, dancing, singing, drawing, reading, riding your bicycle, anything you can think of. It needs to be released every day, because if not, the chemistry in your brain and your body and your heart interacts to produce some way to get it taken care of, and it's likely to cause a problem. So we don't want that. So once again, the topics tonight really aren't necessarily related, but they are related to you. They're things that have come up for you that you wanted to know more about. And so if you are listening to this and you have questions about these topics, or you have a new question that just popped up for you, please email me at the website. Go to Dr. Kathy's office hours. There's a form there to fill out with your question, and I will bring it up on our next video. And by the way, it's totally anonymous. You don't have to tell me who you are unless you want to. And if you want to go on the forums after this Dr. Kathy's office hours and talk more about the subject, please do. There are other people who are dying to hear how you've worked it out. And in fact, I would love to hear from all of you on all of these topics about how you resolve these problems, not just the health problems, but grieving, death and grieving. How have you learned to talk to other people? How have you gotten past that notion that somehow they aren't changing and they don't think you're changing? How do you get past it? And what do you do when they're refusing a diagnosis? I think there's lots of things that we all know how to do, or we've stumbled on and they work, and we might as well share them with each other, because that's what we're here for. That's what our community's about. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you at the next Dr. Kathy's office hours. Bye-bye.